Amazing. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Lunchroom with ART. So exciting to have you back. I'm Sarah Schofield-Manser. I'm ART's Assistant Director of Special Events and Partnerships. I use the she series of pronouns. I am a white woman with long, at this point, dark brown hair that's in a ponytail, and I'm wearing a little sweater turtleneck today because it is very chilly where I am. We are so excited, as I said, to have you here for a very special episode of The Lunchroom. I'm going to take care of a little bit of housekeeping before we have our fantastic guest and guest host join us on screen. First and foremost, you will notice that the chat feature is disabled, so that is not something you can use to communicate between yourselves or between our panelists today, just noting that. Additionally, if you have any questions to submit for our guest and guest host today, we ask that you submit it using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We'll reserve the last 15 minutes or so of the hour to answer your questions, but please feel free to submit at any time so that they don't go out of your brain if they occur to you during the course of the conversation. Last but not least, I'd like to read a little bit of information on the ART side. The first thing is I would like to acknowledge that the land that the Loeb Drama Center and Oberon occupy is the unceded territory of the Indigenous Massachusetts people, and that I myself am calling in from the land of the Wabanaki, Pentucket, and Pennacook peoples in Drake, Massachusetts today. I would encourage you to investigate and learn more about the Indigenous land that you are calling in from today as well. And I'm going to drop a little resource in the chat for you to just check out on your own time if you are curious. It's a very introductory resource, but I think it's really helpful. So dropping that right there. Last, but again, certainly not least, I want to read ART's anti-racism commitment statement. The ART is unequivocally opposed to hate, and we center anti-racism as a core value. We expect everyone in the ART community, including our audiences, to uphold these values. And as such, we will not tolerate anti-Blackness or racism of any kind in our buildings, nor at our online events. We aim to create an environment that is uninhabitable to racism and to discrimination, where all BIPOC staff, artists, volunteers, audience, and community members are seen, heard, valued, and provided the opportunity to thrive. This work is only possible when we do it together, so thank you for being our partner in it. I'm very, very excited about this episode of The Lunchroom. I'm excited about all of them, but this in particular is just really tickling me today. So I would love to have our special guest and guest host join us on camera in just a moment. For those of you who don't know, if you registered and you didn't know, our fantastic guest today is Rhiannon Giddens, who is a performer, composer, cross-cultural connector, and the artistic director of Silkroad Ensemble. We are so excited to have them next weekend at the ART for a limited engagement of Phoenix Rising. I'll drop some links in the chat as soon as we have our guest join us on screen so that you can check out that and get your tickets if you haven't done so already. Without further ado, I'd love to welcome Rhiannon and our amazing host, Diane Paulus, Artistic Director of the ART, to join me on camera. Hello, both of you. Nice to see you.
Hi.
Amazing. Well, I'm going to do what I do best every episode, and that is go off camera, but I will come back at the end to moderate Q&A. And if you have any need for me, just say my name and I will appear. Enjoy.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. I'll introduce myself quickly first for an audio description for folks. I am an Asian American woman. I have brown hair, green eyes. I'm wearing my glasses on my head, as I usually do. And I'm in my office here in New York City. So you can see messy desk and books behind me. Delighted to be here in conversation, Rhiannon. Oh, I also use she pronouns. Rhiannon, over to you for your self-description.
Oh, I'm so bad at this. I have red hair and brown skin and dark eyes, and I'm sitting in a hotel lobby in Stoughton, Wisconsin at the moment. Yeah.
That was great.
And yeah.
Amazing. And we were discussing before we went live, you're about to perform, right? That's why you're in Wisconsin. Maybe you could tell folks what you're doing in Wisconsin.
Yeah, I'm on tour. I'm on a short little bus tour for my record that came out earlier this year with Francesco Cerisi. They're Calling Me Home. And so we're playing at the Stoughton Opera House tonight. And it was Michigan Theater yesterday and Chicago tomorrow. Yes. So
awesome. Well, I definitely want to talk about that album and the music you made for this tour that you're on. But I thought maybe we'd back up a bit. Your such an incredible artist that crosses so many different activities, even as Sarah said, performer, actor, creator, composer. But I wonder if you could just take us back to how music first came into your life, and where the musical inspiration, um, how it started, how you started on your journey.
Um, I mean, I guess it just, music was just kind of part of my life in my family. I grew up singing. It was never something like, I'm going to do this for a career. It was always just, I sing with my sister, I sing with my dad. My mom brings in really interesting music. I was in a choir, children's choir, and it wasn't until I was like almost at college that the idea of doing music full time kind of occurred to me. So it's interesting. I followed sort of my obsession. So I started, listening to opera, and then it was that was my obsession.
Mm.
And, after that it was the banjo, and that became my obsession. So I just have done these really deep dives and fairly disparate musical forms, but oddly enough, at this point in my life at 44, they all work together in this really weird way. Um, so yeah, it seems like I just need to follow where I'm alive, and that's what I've been doing, I guess, for the last 25 years.
Wow. And when you said you started with a passion for opera, was that all opera? Was it any particular opera that you were listening to that first got you hooked?
I mean, I went to this choral camp during the summer, and like ran it like discovered musical theater people, and I was like, oh my God, this is like a whole like way of being. And then I kind of made this decision, like I want to try to get into a school for opera because I don't want to talk. Ironically, given how many speeches that I give now, I don't
Yeah.
want to talk on stage. And opera, they sing all the time, so I have like a couple of opera, um, like like a just a collection of arias, whatever, the most famous opera arias or something. That's all I had, and I, ended up going to school at Oberlin, which is more of an opera school than a musical theater school. And then that's where I fell in love with, once I started really digging into Western art music, I was like, oh man, this is so cool. I love this. I love opera. I love singing it. I really fell in love. But it was, wasn't until I was 18 that that really happened. So it wasn't like I was raised on Verdi or something. It was a real choice. It was a choice. And I feel like that has given me an interesting perspective. It's not, I didn't go into classical music because it's something I already had always done. I chose it, and I chose it because it called to me in a way. And so that's kind of been every step that I've made along my path has been, I've chosen it, And so I think when you do that, like I chose to pick up fiddle and banjo in my 20s, like a ninny. But I think when you choose to do that, you give it an energy that's really strong. You know what I mean? It's not like, oh, I would do this because I've always done it or whatever, which you have to, even within that, you have to choose to do it. You have to like choose that thing. You can't do anything just because you've been doing it, or it just doesn't, you get lost in it and you're like, why am I even doing this?
Right, right. So was the violin, was that kind of in the as an extension of the classical music time for you?
No, 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 no. I didn't study any instruments at Oberlin. It was just voice. I knew a couple of, like a handful of guitar chords. That was it, really. It was all vocal. And then
Wow.
when I went home, I graduated from Oberlin and came back home to North Carolina. I was kind of a little burned out. I kind of went a little, this is what I do. I go all in. And I was like, oh God, I need a break, from the classical world. And I ended up, falling into social dance, like contra dance, square dance. And that's where I found the fiddle and the banjo. And I was like, oh, I love these things. I want to play them. And I bought like a cheap Chinese, like $99 violin, and started learning how to play fiddle music. And I suggest everyone should try to learn an instrument as an adult.
Yes.
It's really,
Not easy, right? Isn't that the thing? Like learn the piano when you're little because it's just easier.
well, it's easier, but the thing is, like, this is, and again, like, I always think of, like, what did I gain by doing that? And I feel like I gained some really good things, like, because when you start as an adult, look, I'm never going to be able to play Paganini, but then I kind of go, that's not what I want to play. I want to play this stuff. And it's like, fiddle music, when I'm learning a tune at a jam, for example, maybe I find four notes and I play those four notes out of the tune. It's like you do what you have,
Mhm.
you do what you can with what you have.
Right.
And that has been kind of a hallmark for me of what I do. It's like, I don't need to play all the notes. I just need to play the important ones
Right.
that support what I'm trying to say with my statement, and learning from a traditional fiddler, by ear, and learning his music like I did, a traditional black fiddler from North Carolina, just really taught me, you don't have to do it all. You just do the thing that you're meant to do and just do that really well.
Right.
And then as that expands in a natural way, like, it's not like you can't learn other things, but it's just like you have to do it in a way that's organic and it makes sense for what you're doing, and not to get prestige or fame or something. It's like, it has to respond to who you are.
Right. That's so fascinating. That you started as a vocalist and then found these instruments. And then I was going to ask you if you were studying the fiddle by ear, if that was, because that's typically not how we enter classical music, right? It's so much about notes on a page, but then this process of learning in a different way. I wonder how that felt. That was probably so much part of the discovery, right? Of what the fiddle and the banjo, what that experience was going to be, and how it was different from classical music.
Yeah, it's a like, I like to say I had two completely different trainings. I learned how to read music. I didn't know how to read music when I went into Oberlin at all. It was like I could follow it. I knew, oh, this goes up, this goes down, but like it was all ear that got me into Oberlin. And because I could hear the stuff and I could reproduce it, but I couldn't tell you what any of it was, or nor could I write it down. So I had to learn how to sight read, and I had to learn how written music works. And my theory was always my weakest class because, I was starting with such a deficit. But I learned a lot, and I learned how to, I learned what the notes were, and I learned how to read music on the fiddle, when I started, because all the beginning books, and then I learned from Joe. So it's like I had like the rudiments. I took like lessons, just to like, how do you put your fingers? How do you hold the bow? And then the rest of it was a traditional training, like, was apprenticeship. So I went to conservatory and I learned classical music,
Yep.
and I learned, and most of it, to be honest, I was by ear because that's how I learned. So I would check out the recordings and learn how the aria went, and then I would follow it in the music. And
Right.
it's always kind of how I do. But then when I picked up the fiddle, I learned how to play, because I was like, I wanted these books to be unlocked for me. I didn't want to have to rely on somebody else's interpretation of this tune. I wanted to be able to play it myself. So I can play, which has been great in my research to old things. As I'm like finding tunes from 1850s, 1860s, 1870s where there are no recordings.
Hmm.
That means so that means I have the ability to play it for myself. And that's really useful. So I'm really glad. But my training on the fiddle was really an apprenticeship in terms of how I play.
Mhm.
So that was just sitting, and you play with somebody, and like, if you get it right, they keep going. That's it. Do you know what I mean? It's a really old style, and it's like, it's very rare these days, apprenticeships, like, where you're really just doing it with that person and they're
Like
correcting you.
playing along with them.
We just played tunes. Like, we would go to Joe. Joe Thompson was 86 when I met him. He was like the last black traditional fiddler that anybody knew of, like, who played the old style. And he was in my family's hometown of Mebane. And me and the other original Chocolate Drops would go down and play with him. And we would just sit and we play the same tunes over and over and over again.
Hmm.
We go down on Thursday night and we would just play with Joe. And what that gifted us was a connection to a lineage, which we now know goes back to slavery days. Like, it's an unbroken oral lineage, musical lineage. So there is this really tangible connection that I now have to a time period where records are scarce, where those kind of connections are few and far between. So it's a huge thing.
Hmm.
But also the idea of making music with your body, making music with your soul, making music as a conversation with somebody. Like, Joe's music isn't on the page. It can't be on the page,
Right.
And so when I play with a young person, they're playing with Joe,
Yes.
through me. But it's like I'm translating it as my me, like this modern person who grew up as I did, but that's how tradition is passed on. It changes through each person,
Mm.
and that idea of transmission, I think, is really devalued in Western culture and in Western structure. And so, like, for me, I value that education just as much as I value the degree I got from Oberlin,
Sure.
and I pull from both of them every day,
Yep.
you know.
Yep. Yeah, no, that's so inspiring. And I think, we often as artists have mentors, right, that we've connected to that are impacting us. But um, this idea of transmission has always been like, has always resonated for me is
Mhm.
what is transmitted to you from a teacher. Even now working, I'm remounting Jagged Little Pill on Broadway, and there's Ebony Williams is one of our dancers, and she's not performing in the show anymore, but she's come back to work with the cast, and she's like transmitting to them,
Mhm.
her body, her language,
Yeah,
her energy. And
yeah,
it's not just like 5, 6, 7, 8, here are the steps. It's something else that goes on, like human to human.
yes,
And it carries so much more, as you say. It's like it's lineage. It's
yeah.
it's history somehow, right?
Mhm.
I'm so curious to hear more about when you speak about your research as an artist.
Mhm.
I feel like you're touching on it, but maybe could you speak a little bit more about this idea of music as research and your passion of conducting research as an artist?
Yeah, I mean, it's such an interesting thing. I don't know. I was like not, wasn't necessarily a researcher growing up. I was really interested in historical novels and historical stories. Like, how did, and not kings and princes and princesses, but like, how did the average person get their milk? How did the average person, you know, go to market? That's the kind of stuff that fascinates me. Like, what did women use for pads back in the day? That's the kind of, the details of the common man and
Yeah.
woman, like, really interested me when I was a kid, but I wasn't like necessarily a history buff. And so when I started to learn about the banjo and the history of it, and kind of like this whole world was revealed to me, but I didn't know that the banjo is an African American instrument, that it was invented in the Caribbean by, people by the African diaspora. And I was just like, that's when I really kind of woke me up to this, what we know enhances us, right? I mean, like, music does not exist outside of its context.
Mhm.
I mean, it can, but like a huge part of what the song is what context it came out of. And it's not to say that you can't lift that and translate it into another context, but knowing the original context
Yeah.
tells you a lot about the piece. And it's like, it's not that you can't do it, but I think the more that you know about it. So for me, that's kind of where it started with the music. And then I was just like, but these songs that are telling me more about my grandparents, like I was understanding my grandparents by studying this music, I was like, I'm going to know more about why if I know more about what was going on around these songs.
Hmm.
Right. And so the more I started doing that, the more things started I started realizing that we teach things very separate in this
Hmm.
society. We teach music over here, and we teach history over here, and we teach journalism over here, and we teach English over here. But actually, everything is together in life.
Yeah.
So why, there's all these connections that the music makes that is informed by the history and vice versa, but you never see that. And so I just started working it into my shows because it was just like I got tired of explaining it to people afterwards. I was just like, let me just work this into what I'm doing.
Hmm.
And then people were just like, kept going, this is so interesting. Tell us more, tell us more, tell us more. And I was like, well, that's fascinating. I think people are starved for what this can do. And like, I work, the way I look at it is like, people are going to read these books. Some people might, but like the average audience goer is not going to read Slavery in the Making of American Capitalism, right? So what I can do is I can get inspired by reading this book because this is a book that I'm going to read. So I get inspired by something in that book, and then I create a song, and then I sing that song. Now, like the song has to stand on its own, you know. But then if I'm in my own show, I create a context around that song, and then I can that somebody engages with that material that was in the book through the song, and
Hmm.
it's like an emotional shortcut,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
then if I provide context, then it rounds it out a little bit, and they may never read that book, but they have this connection to the specific story, which then gives them more knowledge about a
Mm.
particular time. You know what I mean? So I kind of feel like I'm the performing arts arm of the historian society. It's like I try to distill this into a 3-minute song. Um, and I think that that's what music is for. That's what these ballads have been doing for years and years and years. They distill like a whole socio-economic movement into a ballad. You know what I mean? And the words change, and and what people are experiencing. And anyway, I could go on and on and on. It's so fascinating to me, what you learn by digging into the atmosphere that a song or a type of music came out of.
I mean, my mind is buzzing listening to you because there's so many things you're talking about that feel so vital to like the role that the arts can play in society. Because I think you're so right. We put arts over here. We don't think about the records of art, of song as actual like public history that we need to study and learn from. And I was just thinking, because you talked about singing in a choir, how many of us have sang in our school choir, and we just sat in music class and we sang traditional folktale. There were so many songs, but no context, no understanding of where the song came from, or the meaning of it in its time, right? I mean, so it's so curious how the arts get separated from the kind of social movements that they were born out of, or the history and the people and the narratives. It can be just,
Well, I tell you why. It's because, and this is just my theory, is just the arts are powerful, right?
yeah,
So to me, it's like if they're telling stories that are uncomfortable or are challenging the status quo, which is what art is supposed to do.
yeah,
It's a lot easier if if the arts is put into this frivolous category of, oh well, we don't really need that. It's a little extra. It's for fun. It's for entertainment. It's to defang what the arts is supposed to be here for,
right,
and then to commodify it, and to make it a consumable further defangs it, because then when the artist is beholden to the purse strings, how can they say the truth that they're supposed to say? You know what I mean? People figure out
right,
how to do it, but it's very difficult to make art today because of the way that it's set up in this capitalist system, that it's so tied to the bottom line.
yeah,
And people, man, because artists are awesome, people figure out how to do it all the time.
yeah,
But it's just like, it's a push. It really is a push. And then you're always having to justify your existence. Like, we aren't as important as doctors and lawyers. It was like, actually, yeah, we are. Like, everybody plays their part in the functioning of a healthy society. But anyway, I'll go on.
yeah. But I think you're right. I mean, the idea that our value is often proven by box office sales, as opposed to, because like what's the tangible, right? Versus the impact, like the intrinsic impact of the art is a whole other story. That's so inspiring. I wonder, just because you're speaking so much, I think about like your personal mission inside music, and you've become now the artistic director of Silkroad, right? It was July, I think, 2020, in the middle of the pandemic. And maybe you could just speak a little bit about what it meant to take on the leadership of this group, and maybe how these themes we've been talking about, or how you see them a part of what your vision is for Silkroad. I'm such an enormous fan of Silkroad, and just hearing about the kinds of projects that you are cooking up with them, and even the way the ensemble is working, I think is, trying to, as you say, fight against a capitalist system. Like, are there other ways of organizing and decision making, and all of that is so fascinating to me. So maybe you could just speak a little bit about Silkroad for a minute, and what it's meant to come to that ensemble and be a part of it.
Yeah. Well, it's been an opportunity to join something bigger than myself, and to join something that is tied to a nonprofit, mission and organization, so that there's resources to make larger impacts. I've been pushing through basically a social justice oriented thing that you would normally like try to get grants for, but through a capital, like a music career, like a commercial music career. And I've had a limit, I've had some success. I'm very proud of what I've been able to do, but I was getting to the point where I was just like, I like, this is so tiring. Trying to make this music, and it's like the radios ain't playing it. I'm not making my label any. I don't even know what to do. And the MacArthur kind of really um helped me be able to take on some of these projects that money didn't matter anymore, and so I could spend a lot of my time doing stuff. So that was amazing. But I was like, so what's after that? You know what I mean? And where can I be of service? And I think, going back to Joe Thompson, that was one of my biggest takeaways from learning in a traditional manner is, where can we be of service? It's not about where we can be the famous, right? It's not about where we can be, even though people who are famous can use that fame in good ways, blah, blah, blah. It's not the only way to do it. Where can we be of service? And so when Kathy approached me about the opportunity with Silkroad Ensemble, who I admire the group, I've worked with them a little bit, you know, I was like, here's an opportunity for me to be of service in a group of people who are also being of service, and then also the connection to the global aspect of what Silk Road does, which I had been exploring with my partner Francesco, and the work I did with him prepared me in a way to then be able to say yes to Silk Road, because then I figured out, even though I don't know a fraction of what I need to know, I think I know at this point what questions to ask, and I think that's the important thing. So I
Yes.
have felt really a lot of very humbled and honored to be in this position, and I only want to be where I am if I can be of service, and to bring in my perspective, which is coming from a kind of hybrid background, and
Mhm.
also living in a commercial world, kind of bringing all of that perspective to Silk Road. And there's been so much work that everybody has done in the restructuring and being a social justice oriented organization, and there's just so much genius in the whole group. It's just, it's very exciting. We've got a lot of stuff in the hopper, and we're all kind of chomping at the bit to to get off Zoom and on the stage.
Onto the stage. I know. I want to talk about Phoenix Rising, but maybe since you brought up They're Calling Me Home, your new album that you did with, is it Francesco? Am I getting that right?
Francesco.
Francesco. Maybe you could speak about that. I mean, that was an album you made in Ireland, is that right? During the pandemic. And as you say, that kind of prepared you for Silk Road. Maybe you could speak a little bit about the experience of that particular album and the project itself.
Yeah, I mean, it's an outgrowth of my musical partnership with Francesco, which is, he basically connected what I was doing across the ocean to sort of the rest of the world. And that was a really important thing. It's the banjo didn't just kind of appear. And I knew that there were ancestors to the banjo in West Africa, but then what happened before then? And that is something that's really fascinated me and kind of made me see these big patterns in history that kind of happen over and over and over again. And I feel like the more that we get twigged into that, the more we can actually try to hop out of that pattern. Because I can so we did a record called There Is No Other, which really investigated these sort of the rhythms and feels between America, the diaspora in the Americas, and the places closer to the source. And then this second album was not really planned. It was we were in lockdown and playing with each other and couldn't play with anybody else, and the feelings were just coming up, like, how do we deal with this situation? And so we couldn't go back to our home countries for the first time since moving, to Ireland. Like, is a year and a half is the longest I've ever been away from the United States. It was very challenging. And so we found ourselves sort of digging into our own cultural, sort of sinners. So North Carolina looms large in this record. Italy looms large in this record. And so that idea of how do we, comfort ourselves, really, with this music, but in a way that, and we brought in an amazing Congolese guitarist named Newell Sumbu, and an Irish flute and bagpiper. And so the idea of all of our cultural mix, and then the mix of our adopted country. Where do all these things cross? And it was just a really beautiful um, time, to
Wow.
explore that.
And you made all the music and recorded the album in Ireland during the pandemic.
We did on a working farm. It was in between lockdowns. We had like a week that we scheduled, and we were so lucky because like the next week I think we couldn't travel anymore, and
Right.
we were in this stone barn that was like kitted out as a studio on a working farm. Like you pass the cows on your drive up, soup and brown bread every day. So
Yeah.
it was a very Irish experience, but very cool.
Wow. And so that it sounds like that kind of collaboration across so many countries is a little bit of the kind of the work of Silk Road as well, right? I mean, it's such an international community of artists.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's why I wanted to say yes, because like I love where the crossroads are. I love where we rub each other and create this new thing. I'm a mixed race person. There's a lot of dichotomy in my life, classical, folk, black, white, whatever, country, rural, or country city. And so I kind of feel very comfortable in that space.
Mm.
So I'm so excited. I've learned a lot already, and I'm so excited to learn more from all of the brilliant artists in Silk Road, and to learn more about, you know, you know, countries and traditions that I don't know a lot about, and to find, I sat down with Wu Man, who's the like virtuosic pipa player, and she's amazing. And we sat down on a Zoom, and I had my banjo and she had her instrument, and we were finding these commonalities and how they're strung and all this kind of stuff. And I was just like, this is where I get excited, just like where things you don't think are connected actually are, but like 2,000 years ago.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
that's
Incredible.
fascinating to me, because the stuff echoes down the ages. And that's the reason why people met in America and like could talk to each other and like could make music together. And that's why American music is recognized everywhere, because everybody sees a little bit of themselves in American music because it was
Mm.
made from people who came from all over.
Over the
If you
world.
look at the history of American music, that's what it is. It's a constant cultural conversation. So anyway, that's
That's so cool. Maybe could you speak a little bit about the American Railroad Project? Because I feel like that's right, kind of synced into, I think, what I've heard about it, synced into what you're talking about in terms of American music.
Yeah, it was like one of the first things that occurred to me in terms of a big overarching framework project, for Silk Road, because of the the ethnic makeup of the workers of of the railroad. I mean, it was like a lot of Chinese workers, they're Irish workers, they're African American workers, Eastern European. It was like basically all of the throwaway members of society, people who were not considered fully citizens or fully people, were put to work on the railroad. And when you consider what the railroad did and
Yep.
who the railroad made rich, and how it changed the economic face of America, the story that's always told about it is that story. And it's never told the people who made that place possible, the people who died, the people whose industry and whose genius made that possible. And so I was like, whoa, we could find all these stories along the way and really create this idea of it. For me, I'm always going, who gets to tell the American story? Who gets to represent America, right? So there was this centennial of the railroad, of the promontory point, where the western and the eastern railroads meet and creates an unbroken line from the west coast to the east coast. And a lot of like so many majority of Chinese workers were on the western
Hmm.
uh, build of the railroad, and they had this like commemoration of it, and they had promised this Asian American Historical Society that they were going to talk about. They were going to have 5 minutes to talk about the Chinese workers of the railroad, who always get left out of the equation,
Hmm.
and they didn't do it. And they just talked about like who but Americans could blast through these mountains? Who could Americans could build this road? Who but Americans? And there's no mention of the Chinese workers. And I'm sitting here going, okay, like this is what happens. This is how people get erased. But then I'm like, in a weird way, and like it's not the way this guy meant. Who but Americans? Because all of those people had become Americans. I mean,
Right.
that's what America is. But then you also have to consider the indigenous lands that the railroads are going through. So it's kind of
Yeah.
like there's so many layers because they're like, whoa, why is this going through our land? Like, then you have the American government just went, we're just doing this, and
Yeah.
how does it affect the people who were there? I mean, so it's just, it's like American history. It's just, there's really hard pieces of it, but the pieces that I think are really inspiring are where people came together and despite everything managed to do something, or the opportunities that people would have had to, to be changed and to change. Because that is a fact of culture, is that people move and people are changed and people change. So there's a lot to unpack, but we have years to do it. This is a multi-year thing, and we're going to look at all the good, the bad, and the ugly. I mean, I think that's really
Mhm.
important. And it's an opportunity to really herald the multicultural aspect of America in a way that is not just window dressing. It's like we're digging into this foundation.
Yeah.
It's not like diversity now. It's like diversity always. It's like there's
Yeah. Yeah.
always
Like the
this
bedrock.
story.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And
Yeah.
and so I think the railroad is a perfect way to do that.
Yeah. So exciting. And I know you're collaborating with the artists, and I mean it's such an out of the box project in so many ways. Just I think, the way you describe it in terms of the narrative that you're trying to like uncover and
Mhm.
put in the foreground, right? But also maybe just the scope of it and the scale of it. It just seems it should take years, right? Because it's like
Yeah,
a historical kind of excavation, right? Artistic
yeah.
excavation. So exciting. Um, I know we're the time is really passing quickly. Before we go to questions, could you speak a little bit about Phoenix Rising? We're so excited to be hosting Silk Road on our stage the weekend of November 19th. And we're so excited that you're going to be performing. And maybe you could tell the folks that are listening a little bit about maybe what to expect, or what that weekend of music might be about, or why is it called Phoenix Rising?
Well, it's a really important moment for Silk Road. I mean, pandemic was hard on everybody, and Silk Road had been kind of coming to a crossroads, and kind of when you are around for as long as Silk Road has been, which is 20 years for
Mm,
an arts organization that is as unusual as Silk Road. That's a long time.
yeah.
you know People start off with these intentions and then it falls apart after 5 years. So it's a real celebration, but it's also a moment to reflect, and it's kind of like, okay, what has worked, what hasn't worked, where are we going from here? And I think there's been a lot of self-reflection, there's been some internal restructuring, just taking the opportunity, you can call it that, of the pandemic, of everybody being in one place and being able to communicate over Zoom at least,
Yeah.
and to really think about that and to kind of recommit to the central tenets of Silk Road. And so this is now the idea of the Phoenix, is that it's kind of like it's a rebirth, you
Mm,
know, but it's a homecoming at the same time. It's a grieving. It's a,
mm,
we've all, there's all of this human interaction that we haven't had for a year and a half. And it's like we're coming together for all of these things, and it's a jumble of everything. It's like we're grieving this, we're so happy to be together again. We're thinking about the new, we're kind of going, there's all, on honoring the old. So there's new pieces, new commissions that we're very excited about. There's pieces that Silk Road has done, but we're doing them in a different way. There's pieces that Silk Road has done that I'm going to be kind of, saying, can I bring my banjo to the party? So, and we're also just learning each other. Like there's still loads of people I haven't met in person,
yeah.
and I'm a different, I am, I mean, Yo-Yo he is just a special, like, beam of light, and he's just incredible. And I'm not in any way trying to fill his shoes. I'm just going to be barefoot instead, and kind of, do my thing, which is
Right.
why I've been brought in. And so we're figuring out how that works. How is it that I'm, in amongst the ensemble? Like, how are we going to work together? I'm really excited. I feel like there's been so many great things happening already, and the ideas. I'm so respectful and in awe of these folks and their brains and their abilities. And I'm just like, there's so much I think we can do together. So this is the beginning. And it's a transitional, it's kind of like, it's just been a heck of a time, and we're going to celebrate and hug,
Oh my
in a
God.
musical way,
It sounds amazing. It's like what we need, right? We have to have a ritual of coming together and coming out and coming together and celebrating. And what better way to do that than through music?
Yeah.
Just a question: is all the music the weekend that we're going to be hosting you? Um, is it all? Is it some of it improvised, or is it all set, or how does that work? I realize I'm not even aware of how things are, not how all the pieces are, handled in Silk Road.
Well, I'm learning myself, because I've actually never, I've only performed with Silk Road one time. Um, but as far as I know, a lot of it is written down, but there are always moments of
Mhm.
improvisational moments, and I'm bringing a piece that is, it's coming from more of my culture and tradition, so it'll definitely be not written down.
Yep.
But I'd say most of it is, it's when you have an ensemble that large, you kind of
Yeah.
have to have a certain amount of organization, and a lot of the pieces that are commissioned for particular
Right.
subsets,
Arrangements. Yep.
yeah, so there's a lot of organization that has to go on. I'm learning a lot about being part of a large ensemble, and like how do we get the back line, and how do we set this up, and it's a
Yes.
lot, and that means, there's also a lot of people on the ground who aren't going to be on stage, and this is the people that, folks forget are absolutely integral to these kind of productions, is that they're figuring out all the ways to make it happen, but they never get the credit, because they're not on stage bowing at the end. So it's
Mm.
always take the opportunity to mention how much work it takes to put on a show like this, from the ground up, production, people organizing the programs, just everything. It's a
Yes.
real team effort.
Yes, I know over the ART we're excited and challenged in a great way of how to fit all the instruments on the stage. It's so thrilling. It's such a big
Yes.
ensemble,
Yeah, it's
But
amazing.
you're so right. There's all this work that goes into what seems effortless, right? When the performers take the stage, but it's
Yeah.
it's it's a lot of preparation. I'm looking at the clock. I don't know, Sarah, if you want to rejoin us again for our last 15 minutes here, if there've been questions.
Words. With
Been-
this has been such a fascinating conversation to listen into. So thank you again, Rhiannon, for joining, and Diane for hosting. We love a lunchroom moment. It's always the highlight of my week. So without further ado, we have quite a few questions that have been submitted. I do not think we are going to get to everyone today, so my apologies, but we'll get through as many as we can. Starting with this question, which was submitted early on in the conversation, so I think relates to some of the topics we were talking about 30 minutes ago. But Rhiannon, this person is saying that the way you talk about music being integrated with these other subjects sounds a lot like ethnomusicology. They're curious if you have any thoughts on that definition, and if you've ever considered teaching academically or have taught academically.
I don't consider myself an ethnomusicologist, because I consider myself a historically informed musician. And I've thought about it a lot, but ethnomusicology is, I I'm always going to be a musician first, and an artist first, and I want to have the freedom to say, you know what, I could be wrong. Here's the research that I'm based on, and they're the ones who did all of the hard stuff. They went and did the footnotes and the this and the that. I'm a secondary source person, and I need the primary sources I need them translated, and I'm okay with that. I have a bachelor's in music performance. I've never taken a class in anything other than music, as an adult. So I'm self-taught, and I feel like that's my strength, is that I go where I'm interested in, and people like me and Francesco work with ethnomusicologists, and we work with historians, and we come in and we do a workshop, we do a lecture, and we inspire people to maybe then go dig, and what we do is we kind of see this and this and this and this and this. Whereas if you've got a degree, you're doing this because you have to really have authority in your subject. So we have the ability to make connections, I think, that are important, and we can't get too far down. If that makes sense, it's
Yes.
it's something that we have thought about, but we are happy to leave the theses and stuff to the brains.
Hmm.
This is a slightly related question, so answer this in your particular lens. But we have someone asking about your connection to Celtic and Irish folklore and music, and its historical connection to Appalachian folk music. Can you talk a little bit about that for us?
I will try to be brief. This is something I know a lot about. I got into Scots Gaelic music when I was fresh out of college because the largest settlement of Scots Gaelic speaking Highlanders was in North Carolina outside of Scotland,
Hmm.
in what is now Scotland County. And there were Black people who spoke Gaelic. There was a whole church, a Black church, that sent off for a Gaelic preacher because they wanted a preacher that spoke their language. And you can imagine why they spoke Gaelic. You don't have to think too hard. But that fascinated me because what it did, it upended this narrative that we're told about Celtic. Now, number one, Celtic is a very imprecise, it's a term that has been used as a way to commercialize stuff and to commodify stuff, but it really should be tied to the language, and that's a whole nother thing. But the thing is that you have these distinct groups, in Appalachia. You had the folks who had been planted in Northern Ireland who then came over. I mean, there were Scots who were put into Ireland to tame the Irish Popish savages. I mean, it's a really complicated history. Gaels in Scotland and Ireland were colonized by the English before the English ever came to the US. So this is important. So then those people who were then colonized came over to the States. And what happens is that they then end up being part of the power play of the colonizer, and to then jockey with other lower forms of ethnicities. You know what I mean? It's just like, it's super, super complicated. So I'll stop it there. But to say that Irish weren't considered white, Gaels weren't considered white until later in the economic development, and in a way to continue to depress African Americans and to create a class above them.
Hmm.
It's like almost white, or okay, you're the lower rung of white. I mean, this is how it works. In the music, Appalachia is a collection of all of the people who've been there, and there were always Black people in Appalachia. So there's a narrative that Appalachian culture is a pure Anglo-Celtic, thing that survived in isolation, which is just not true. George Gibson talks about how Black people helped shape Kentucky old time music, the banjo, and until the Great Migration, up to about 20% of people in Appalachia were African American.
Hmm.
So it's an important topic because of what it says about what actual American life is and what it says about what we're told American life is. And there's a lot to be learned about why that narrative has been forced upon us. Because what it does is it keeps us divided, and it keeps the idea of what the other is tied to skin color. It keeps it tied to this very simplistic ideas of race, when actually race is made up and is an ever moving target depending on who's in power. Right. So that's why I always challenge the whole Celtic thing as I talk about the Black Gaelic speaking people, coming from Dr. Michael Newton's research, because it challenges, I've been challenged at, I went to the Highland Games, biggest Highland Games in North Carolina, or in the States. It's in Grandfather Mountain. I won the Gaelic singing competition because I'm a nerd like that. I was learning it. I love the language, and I was respectfully learning the language and the music, and just with those connections. And I'd be walking around and people would be like, "Why are you here? Like, what's your connection to?" And I was just like, "Yo, like, do you speak any Gaelic?" It's just kind of like, you just want to buy a kilt and say that you're Scottish. Like, there's just, how we engage with ethnicity, race, and all of that. Anyway, so that's I was just about as short as I could make it.
Oh my God. And that gets back to what you were saying just about then what we assume is American, right? I mean, it's just like, yeah.
That's such an interesting historiographical approach. I feel like I just learned so much in that past 3 months. I'm very big history nerd myself. So this is like just my mind gears are twisting into different shapes.
Well, you know what's really interesting is people always like to talk about Appalachia, but in actuality, as I'm doing more research, especially this book that I'm reading now about the Creole synthesis, is where actual Irish and Black cultures are mixing was in like the cities, was on the waterways, was on the riverboats, was out west. There were these really interesting cultural connections that were going on. Five Points. They talk about like these Irish and these Blacks are marrying each other and they're all living together. We got to separate them. This is terrible. And it's just kind of like we don't talk about that. We like to always go to Appalachia. And there's nothing wrong with Appalachia. Look, I play music from Western part, but there are these other really interesting actual like other because there was cultural collaboration in Appalachia too, but there were these really things that are actually at the heart of American popular music. When you look at the songs and stuff that went into what became minstrelsy, which then took them in a different direction. But when you look at that music, it's a real like it's like a triangle. There's like a Caribbean, Irish, like Anglo-Celtic Afro melange that's going on, and it's just like that. I'm just like, there's so much to learn, and it just shows us that there's no pure don't exist. And it's not just in America, it doesn't exist anywhere. But anyway, I could go on for days.
I wish we could. I always say that an hour is not nearly long.
I know, here we are.
Never felt more true than in this exact minute. A few more questions I'm going to try to get to. So shifting gears ever so slightly, is there something that you've read about that you'd most want to transform into a staged or musical production? Like source or anything, really? I guess this question's pretty broad.
I mean, the thing that I've been kind of like talking about now for a few years is the Massacre of 1898 in Wilmington.
Yeah.
And the reason I want to put that into a musical piece is multifold. One is it's not because of the violence of what happened. It's the thing that was happening that was destroyed in that moment. That's what I want to celebrate in song and visuals, like Black people and bustles and like this kind of clothing that we just like. I'm tired of seeing like tattered like plantation outfits. It's like Black people existed in a lot of different ways, and this was a moment, which is why it was destroyed so fully.
Yeah,
because it was so challenging, this moment of Black and white political mixing, actual mixing, all of that was such a challenge. And I'm like, there was this moment, where it was happening. Wilmington, it was happening. And I want to hold that up. I don't want to focus on all the terrible acts, because that means we have to talk about it. But like, I want to focus on the beauty of what was and what might have been. And so that when that is destroyed, you feel the loss. And there were so many of the active participants, like the people who are at the center of that story, and music has such a huge part to play in that. The wife of the newspaper man whose newspaper was like destroyed. Anyway, it's a long story. She was on tour with the Fish Jubilee Singers in Europe, when she got the news. And there's just so much that just naturally lends itself to be something with drama and music. And music had such a huge part to play in the lives of these folks that it just seems like a thing. So, I've been talking about it kind of ad nauseum for a few years, and hopefully we're on the cusp of getting it, starting to get that going. But I've been working with John Jeremiah Sullivan, who's just an amazing researcher and writer, and who's just found all this incredible stuff. But it's really about the character of the South, the character of America, and why these things keep getting destroyed. What is at the heart of it? The heart of it is always mixing, always, and it's threatening because it can't control what happens when you mix one thing with another. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what they're going to look like.
That's right. Right. Because it's not pure.
Right. You can't control them anymore, So.
Oh, I look forward to see. I have some high hopes for this. I really look forward to seeing that someday on stage.
Yeah, me too.
Very exciting.
We've got a few. I want to lift up a couple comment threads happening here. We had a bunch of folks who saw you perform recently in Lowell, Massachusetts, which is adjacent to my hometown, in this past September, and they just want to pass along their compliments and say that it was extremely moving to see you perform and to see live performance. And I'm extremely upset that I missed it, given that it would have been a hop, skip, and a jump from where I'm calling in from now. But next time I'll catch you. We've got a question here, and it's a little different than what we've been talking about. But could you talk about one of your favorite pieces of music that's been written or performed by someone else that does showcase a moment in history?
I mean, I have to talk about Sunday in the Park with George. That's like my favorite piece ever, by Stephen Sondheim. And for me, it's one of the most beautiful examples of how he was inspired and then made up a bunch of stuff. So there's historical framework, but then he created a story around, he imagined this, right? It's about Georges Seurat and the creation of a Sunday afternoon on the island of La Grande Jatte, the big pointillism painting.
Yep.
And through that, he makes so many amazing, like, just right on the money, just observations about art and the role of the artist and the role of art and how art comes from life, and then how do you reinterpret something 100 years later, and it's just like, it's just got all the stuff in it.
Thank you. Oh God, these questions.
I love that you cited a musical theater reference. That's so cool.
So we have time for, I think, 2 more questions. I'm going to try to cram them in. They're really good. This person is saying they've really loved hearing you speak. Do you have any ideas about how to convince the defenders of the status quo about how we should teach history? Because you're telling the real history. So how do we convince mainstream historians to really approach it in this new way? If you have any.
Well, you see, I mean, this is why I don't teach, right? This is why I'm not in a university setting, and because if there's people who are fighting that good fight in those settings, so I think everybody has to kind of find their way of challenging the status quo, and they do it in their way. And so this is the way that I was led to, and I think that everybody has to figure out what that is, because as you see, the language gets rewritten. Like, already critical race theory has become a bugaboo that people don't even know what it is, but they know they don't like it. And that's how people control the narrative. So all I can do is bombard with these stories. Like, I've got an opera about Umar ibn Said that is coming out next year, and it's being played, different places. And it's like, we have to tell the story and just say, here's the story of what actually happened, and here's our interpretation of it. And you just keep doing it. Like, I've got Lucy Negro Redux, a ballet that was done in conjunction with Caroline Randall Williams, like talking about this aspect of Black life in Europe. And you're just kind of like, tell the stories, find the stories that interest you and that make you passionate and make you excited, and then tell those stories, and to find the partners that enable that. Like Spoleto commissioned me to write this opera. The Nashville Ballet came to me about this thing. It's like finding those partners that also want to do. So the more that we can do together, the more that we can, because all you can do is just hope that people see it and they're inspired to go pick a book. How I've been able to see myself contribute to the conversation. So that's that. And there's other people doing institutional stuff that's really important, and everything. It takes all of us. I think.
And I should just say, Rhiannon, if you don't know Taya Miles, she's a professor at Harvard, and she actually teaches history, and she talks about history, that history comes not just from textbooks, that it comes from the plays that have been written, the music pieces, the sculptures, the oral histories that are handed down from families. So she is a historian at Harvard who's really trying to widen that idea of where history comes from. So that's
amazing.
Someone we should get you connected with.
Yes, please.
Absolutely. I know we are at the end of the hour, so I don't want to throw this at you and expect an elaborate response, but we do have a lot of students in the audience today, and something we always ask our lunchroom guests, if you could give one piece of advice to a student who's starting out in the arts and really wants to pursue a career in the performing arts, what would that piece of advice be?
Oh gosh. I would say, I'm just looking up. I just wanted to say it's the Creolization of American Culture by, I think, Christopher Smith. Somebody asked about the book that I was talking about.
Yes.
So,
Mhm.
and it's looking at early American music through the paintings of William Sidney Mount and that whole Mid-Atlantic. This is where a lot of this, kind of Celtic, Afro-Celtic, Anglo synthesis was happening. But anyway, I my thing is, because I get asked that because of my path is so unique. Um, you have to listen to this,
Mhm.
and that's hard. When I graduated Oberlin, I just remember going, like, what am I going to do that a million other sopranos can't do as well as me or better in opera? Like, what am I going to do that is of service? And I didn't even know that's how I was thinking about it, but I was like, and when I found the banjo, that's when I'm like, oh, I found a way to be of service. So I just think that's important. And you have to find a way that it feeds you to be
Yeah.
of service, and through your art, through your whatever that it is that you do, and you're given a unique tool. I think we're all artists. We're all artists, and we use our art in different ways. And I just think that the more you know yourself and the less you listen to the establishment and what you should do or could do or
Mhm.
would do, I think the more you'll find your own particular path.
Mm.
And surrounding yourself with people who want that for you. That's important.
Yeah.
And if they don't want that for you, they need to go away. That's it. If,
Yeah.
if they're not in this for the greater good, and want your health,
Yeah. Because it's hard. You need that. You need a culture around you that supports
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good advice for anyone, even if you're not a student or starting out in the program.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you both so much. This has been such an incredible conversation, and I am so excited for Phoenix Rising next weekend. There's some links in the chat for everyone who's watching at home if you want to get your tickets. If you missed it, it's on our website, AmericanRepertoryTheater.org. You can find all the links that you would need there. Thank you, Rhiannon, again so much. Thank you, Diane. What a fantastic way to start our Tuesday. Hope you're both doing well. Rhiannon, enjoy Wisconsin, and I will.
Yes. Have a great show tonight. Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Shannon. Thank you. Take
Bye,
care.
everyone. Thank you.